I'm Matt Landau from vrmb.com, and this is Unlocked, Season 7, Unglamorous. This episode's brought to you by Point Central, the leaders in smart home automation, and Breezeway, a property care and operations platform. Alex Cruz is the founder of Welcome Home Club, a vacation rental management company in San Antonio, Texas, and he's one of the more survival-oriented managers I've met. His background in the military and working for Fortune 500 companies give him a deep understanding of how things work, how things should work, and the conditions for when things fail, and how to avoid these conditions with preventative measures. Our discussion addresses an unglamorous, or as Alex calls it, really just hard era right now when vacation rental demand far exceeds supply, which means the real money questions are a little bit buried and less obvious. How much is too much to charge your guests? How to stop review quantity and quality from trending downwards? And what to do about bad or irresponsible hosts that ruin communities. Some of Alex's views are controversial, and for that, I appreciate him. Let's get into this.
I joined the military actually when I was still in high school, doing something called a split-op program, where in between my junior and senior year of high school, I went to basic, and when I was done with that over the summer, I came back and finished out high school. But that was a great experience, I think, in my life in terms of making or preparing me for the next phases, which was going to business school into University of Texas at Austin. Combe School of Business, a great school. And then throughout that time, I was also serving the military and, kind of set me up, I think, to succeed in the business world. And I've worked for companies in the CPG industry for the majority of my career. So that would be companies like Procter & Gamble and General Mills and S.C. Johnson and Son. And so I worked for those companies, which gave me a really unique, I think, perspective on consumer behavior. And I did a lot of data analysis on consumer behavior and how people shop, and things like that, and demographics. So I think it set me up well for the industry, and it's been a really interesting experience seeing how different another industry really thinks about those things.
I think kind of the common denominator across all those things is you seem to be both very analytical and very systems oriented. And I think those are two things that are extremely valuable in the vacation rental space. So give us a snapshot of what the Welcome Home Club looks like right now as a vacation rental management company in San Antonio.
Sure. Yeah. We manage about 35 properties, and we've been operating for just about 3 years now. And we've had very measured. So our philosophy is very measured growth and sustainable growth, and how we think about picking up new owners. Early on, it wasn't like this, as I'm sure anyone who's listening to this knows. When you first start the business, you kind of take what you can get, and then you start figuring out what you want this thing to look like when it gets larger. And thankfully, I think a combination of factors, including the pandemic, allowed us to keep in perspective how quickly we wanted to grow, because certainly we could have grown quite a bit faster. It's something I think a lot of other companies should really consider in a boom time like I think we're entering now. But as a company, we're growing now. We feel like we have systems that allow us to have capacity to grow with quality management in mind. And, that's kind of where we're at the moment.
I think you kind of summed up what we aim to explore in the last season of this podcast. The theme was magic zones, finding that sweet spot for your business and building in some guideposts and some upper boundaries so that you're not just blindly chasing growth the way that business school sometimes teaches, but rather looking for quality over quantity. You're looking for lifestyle. And you, for me, sort of epitomize a new kind of vacation rental manager that's thinking dare I say, sustainably. And when people hear the word sustainability, they immediately think environment. And we're going to be touching on that, both the literal environment and your community around you. But how do you define sustainability in your business? How do you think about it internally?
Yeah, it feels like we need to come up with a new word or something because sustainability gets used
Mm-hmm.
in so many different ways, and all of which are generally, valid. But that's not how I would think about it uh, in the sustainability context of building a business. And so I think you can build a business around those types of concerns. But in terms of just generally building a business, I think there's sustainability issues that you have to address that in this particular industry, I feel maybe get overlooked quite a bit, which are sustainability whenever it's not, when I think what's happened in the past year is basically demand has way outpaced supply. And because of that, it seems like basically anything you do is going to be successful. You almost have to try to not be successful in a scenario like that, especially in a new industry.
And almost anybody can enter because it's so easy. The barrier to entry is so low.
Exactly, and it's just because there's a lot of demand, and it's a matter of supply and demand economics. So I think what happens as industries mature, or products mature, or anything like that, um, you don't see that dynamic continue forever. It can't. And what happens once it stops, demand stops outpacing the supply, is you start seeing competitive pressures ramp up, and that means you have to have models that can sustain sustainable profitability during those types of periods. And I think it's something that's maybe being missed in the broader discussion of what sustainability means. And I think there's a few different parts of that that we can get into, but it's really about thinking what happens when competitive pressure ramps up, or there's regulatory pressure that ramps up because of the development of an industry.
And I like to think of it very simply as thinking beyond the next fiscal quarter or the next year. Like, as small business owners and managers trying to do everything, it's sometimes hard to pick your head up and see out into the future. But once you start thinking past next year, past several years, if you really still want to be in the best position possible, there are things you can begin doing right now. And a vacation rental manager like you is, I think, very unique in the entrepreneurial sense because you basically have two customers. You have owners, property owners who you're managing their properties, and you have vacation rental guests who are coming to San Antonio for any number of reasons. So, how do you view that sort of duality under this sustainable lens?
Side note there, I'm glad you mentioned it's thinking about further than the next quarter. One of the things that I really didn't like about when I was working for consumer packaged good industry, or kind of more corporate organizations, is that they very much are focused on short term a lot of the times, and I think it's frustrating because I think there's a lot of easy mistakes you can make when you focus that way. So that's one of the reasons why I really enjoy this industry. And the way I think about owners uh, and guests, which you're right, we have two constituencies in that way, that we're trying to represent uh, almost to each other really well. But what we're trying to do is understand that you have to have the most profitable owners and the most profitable guests, I think. So you need to have uh, the ability to capture both sides of that, I think, to be truly sustainable as a high profit organization in the future. And so the way we approached that was, okay, well, what are most profitable owners' characteristics? What are those characteristics? What do they look like? And what are the most profitable guests looking for? And how do we capture that?
What are they? I'm very curious to learn what are the characteristics of those two.
I think something I've learned is it changes so much depending on the market, and how to capture them changes depending on the market. One of the things I've learned from VRMB discussions is that I think some markets, especially there's a difference between traditional vacation rental market guest and kind of these new markets that popped up in the last 5 years. And, those guests didn't really exist before there. They existed before other places. And what matters to them seems to be different. So on the guest side, I think it really starts with you asking yourself the question of, well, what do the most profitable listings, do? Like, what, the ones that have the highest price points at high occupancy, like how are they able to do that? They're clearly capturing a guest that's, that's high value, and starting to back into it through that. Me telling you what it looks like in San Antonio won't really help someone else, not outside of San Antonio necessarily. But I think it's a thought process. It's a way of thinking about is that what I'm trying to do? Am I trying to capture the most profitable guests? On the most profitable owners, it's a very similar dynamic. I think it has less variability in the sense that I think most folks who do property management have realized that the owners who want to invest, who want to have the best listings, who are willing to make improvements or adapt, change, are the ones that usually you want. And attracting them can be difficult because owners who have properties that are capable of doing those things and the money to follow through on the investment piece likely are very investment oriented. They understand ROI. They understand these things that if you can't compete with someone else they're not going to be the most loyal owners in the world. But if you can compete on that front, I think you have a very sustainable business model.
So the most profitable owners are most profitable properties represented by owners, correct?
Well, I would say, yeah, most profitable property potential sometimes. So some of our best owners didn't have any properties before we started consulting with them.
Huh.
And we start talking with them about the things that they should be doing to have the most profitable property. And so it's really an owner mentality of wanting to invest and have the upside potential versus just, I want to, have that out there. Don't want to think about it. Don't want to put any more money into it. Make me as much money as you can.
And most vacation rental managers have one option. We will manage your home or we won't. But you have kind of like a la carte style list of management services. Is that what you mean by they were profitable before they were actually listing with you?
I think what we've honed in on, which our website doesn't necessarily reflect that much, is really the personal relationship side of the owner relationship of Welcome Home Club, and the consulting relationship, which that we do for our business for free, which I know would not sound like something most others would want to do. But the ROI for us and for owners is extremely high when you find the owners who want to invest in having a best-in-class property in an area.
So it's a mindset, really.
Exactly. It's more of a mindset versus a pricing strategy or something like that. You're looking for, I think, owners who want to have the best-in-class properties in an area.
And so we'd start with that owner and property that is the most profitable. And once we're able to identify that, our natural next step is the guests who are interested in paying for it. Is that correct?
Correct. Yep.
Okay, cool. So then how do you measure this? Because we've just talked all high level. How do you actually measure that within the business?
Well, I think there's a lot of ways to do it. And one of the things that that's easy on the owner side is a pretty simple ROI calculation. What are their costs per month, and then what's their average revenue per month, and that's going to look better if you're a best-in-class property, and that's through the ability to get high occupancy at high price points. And so, if you look at comps, which I'd recommend everyone does, to figure out, who are these competitive sets? What are they doing better? How are they capturing current demand? And how would you theoretically capture that same demand by doing things better or at a higher value to them? You can very easily back into, okay, well, you're in the top 5 of properties in that area in terms of occupancy to price point, and the difference between that and the next 5 or the bottom 5, or however you want to do that, it's a pretty easy story to build if you're that profitable or that strong and competitive wise.
And how are you doing this comp set?
Manual work, man. There's not an easy way to do it, to be honest. We go on to VRBO, Airbnb, find the listings that show up first, which are the ones who are likely to have the best occupancy and price point, relative price point and occupancy, and start look for ones in the same area, look for ones of the same characteristics. I would always look at it from a guest perspective. When a guest is searching a site, what are they seeing? And I know a big focus right now is direct booking, so this may not be as relevant, except for in terms of how I think about it, which is a guest is going to see both of these properties. Which one are they going to pick, and how well are these other properties doing? But it's still worth the the time spent to see what other options are out there, because eventually that will come back and be something. And in order to capture the most profitable guests, you need to be looking at.
And so then are you putting together that comp set and showing it to the prospective homeowner?
Yeah. Some of it hidden in terms of exactly what, listings they are and things like that, just because we don't like to give owners too much, time sucking stuff. So because we could give them so much information and we know that they want to spend time not managing these things. So, the way that I work, or the way that I am, I'm sure you can tell by how long my posts usually are, is I can give you a lot of information. And so we try to, make sure owners have information that's relevant. They're not going to end up burning all their time doing stuff that they're hiring us to do. But we give them as much information as they want, basically. But generally speaking, I give them, hey, these are, comp 1, comp 2, comp 3. This is what our forecast is on what they're doing. This is what our forecast is on what we, will be doing or are doing at the time, or whatever stage we're in with that owner.
So we've addressed that you're in what's already a very tricky ask of tending to both your homeowners and your guests first, which is hard enough in and of itself. But I want to get a little bit more granular and talk more specifically about a challenge that you and I have been going back and forth on now for quite some time. And it has to do with the trend of reviews, guest reviews, and average daily rate. So before we get into the actual ROI for owners and stuff, could you summarize that trend that you and I have been talking about?
I think anyone listening to this who's been doing it for a little while, property manager that is, understands that right now, in all likelihood, what's happening is during peak, if this is peak season for the area they're in, that they're seeing review, good review, kind of the frequency decline. And so that's either review count, people aren't reviewing, or they're just not giving you as good of reviews as you were getting before, either as measured by star count if it's Airbnb or VRBO or whatever metric you use to look at these things. Or it's just glowing review counts and stuff like that. And at the same time, I would bet that your prices are a lot higher than they normally have ever been, including in a peak period. And so prices are at a all-time high and reviews are moving down at the same time. There's a correlation between that, and it's likely to do with value. Guests are paying more, they expect more. And sometimes I think because of the supply and demand economic that we're facing, you see people, being forced basically to pay these prices. That's why we're able to charge them. And if you don't exceed expectations at those price points, because they're going into it already knowing they overpaid, if you don't exceed expectations, you're not likely to probably get a review that you're used to getting at much lower price points.
Listeners, pay close attention to how Alex makes sense of this pickle. It's a very real, serious, unsexy part of the vacation rental business right now. So let's listen how he handles this predicament with his homeowners?
Well, with owners, it's about sustainability. So the way we think about it is, if we get bad reviews, how does that affect us long term? How does that put us, competitively speaking, in position for the future? We're not going to relaunch the listing every year, so it's a new problem every year or anything. And so the idea with owners is, how do we sustainably price or deliver value? And sometimes that can be investment. Sometimes that could be not charging as high as you possibly can, because it's not worth it. The place isn't worth it. Just because you can charge $1,500 a night doesn't mean you should. And I think that's where I think the dynamic pricing might have some opportunity. Is not just looking at what does supply and demand allow you to do, but what should you be doing in terms of delivering that value to guests. And how you deliver that value to guests could be a whole lot of different ways. I think it depends on the area, depends on the market, depends on the company, depends on the owners. But if you have owners who are those most profitable owners, I think there's always solutions.
With my vacation rental business in Panama, when I bought the business, the properties were at $100 a night, and they were nice luxury villas in the middle of the historic district, and that was just fantastic value. And my immediate instinct was to increase the prices a bit, and we did. And nothing happened to the amount of inquiries that continued coming in. In fact, our annual revenue increased proportionally. Several years later, we kept the prices more or less stable. This is way before dynamic pricing, how I would have loved to play around with those tools. But several years later, when a new business partner joined, he challenged me to increase the prices even further to, I think, $175 a night, which he may have said 200, and we eventually settled on 175. But I was concerned that guests were not going to be perceiving the same level of value that really wooed me when I first stayed there in the first place. So is this value thought process kind of the compass that you use with regards to guests?
Yeah, it is. It's a bit, I think reviews are your best measure of if you're doing well as a company. I think any company, if they get too far into this mindset of the best way to grow is just to maximize price as much as we can while getting the occupancy target that we want to get to, without including in that, well, are guests happy? Are they enjoying themselves? Are you delivering on the thing that you should be doing here to be sustainable and to actually, to be, I think, good in this industry at what you do, which is delivering good experiences to guests. If that's not a fundamental part of your thinking, I think that's almost a definition of unsustainable, an unsustainable model in this industry.
Yeah, and like if you're all about repeat business, you got this whole direct booking strategy to generate inquiries from listing sites and then bring them into your own court for future repeat and referral direct bookings. If that's a pillar of your strategy and your guests are not perceiving value in the experience, you kind of are pulling the rug out from underneath yourself in a way.
Yeah, I agree. And I know, anybody who has looked at any of my posts knows that direct booking isn't a part of my strategy. It can be.
We could make a whole new podcast season about your philosophy there.
Yeah, but I would say on the repeat component, the way that I would say anyone should be thinking when it comes to sustainability is truly those most profitable guests. Are those generally repeat or not? I don't know, because I don't do that type of measurement, because the marketing channels that I use don't require me to. But I do want to say it's always a good idea probably to consider, are you competitive? Repeat, I think, takes away a part of that competitive component of, can I go into a VRBO platform or an Airbnb platform and still my product is good enough to where it can be competitive with the best listings on those platforms. And I think if you do that, it doesn't matter what channel you use or how channels change, you'll always have a product that's competitive.
And I think a lot of people listening who do focus on the direct booking channel also would throw in the fact that repeat business tends to be less costly in terms of communicating to new guests, calibrating their expectations. With a new guest, you got to start from scratch. How do you view expectations in this whole commitment?
I think it's very hard to do what you're saying to do, and I think that your community is really good at it, and that's impressive in its own right, to be honest. Because repeat business and vacation rentals, at least in non-traditional vacation rental markets, as well as traditional ones, I think is a hard thing to capture. It's convincing people not only to revisit the area, but then to also, look around and see what else is available or not, and decide I'm going to stay at the same place, because at that point, that the value has been exceeded during that first stay. And that's always a goal. The way I think about it, it is, if you have a large percentage of repeat guests, I just wonder what price point growth can look like, what innovation, if what you did 2 years ago is still getting that weekend filled today, I wonder where the motivation is to improve that experience and improve price point along with it. And so I'm sure that the professionals, and which is the reason I love VRMB, the professionals there really understand this business, and I'm sure they're considering that. But I do wonder on that, if I tried to go with that sort of strategy, how it would influence where our focus is on that kind of stuff.
And now a word from our sponsors. This episode's brought to you by Point Central, the leaders in smart home automation. But instead of me telling you how great I think they are, or reading off some kind of script, here's Karen and John Bobie of Sunset Properties.
Point Central, no other way. We tried other locks, and the Point Central locks blows all the
We did a test. We did 6 of every one available.
And because we're at the very end of the island, we have limited internet. We have limited, as you know, cell service.
Access to teammates.
Exactly. And so therefore, and then you also have a harsh environment here with the salt water and the wind and, all that other good stuff out there. So we wanted to make sure that our locks stood up to the environment, and that they were always pretty much, 90% ready to rock and roll and not losing
and
Point
connection. Central won the competition.
Hands down. No connections lost.
Like we had attrition on the others in 3 months.
Attrition, literally the things were dying.
Things didn't stop working.
I could not have said that any better myself. If you'd like to learn more about Point Central, head over to pointcentral.com/VRMB. They're now taking on vacation rental managers with less than 25 properties, which is a complete game changer. And Breezeway, a property care and automation platform that solves the challenges of ensuring clean, safe, and high-quality properties in the wake of the pandemic. And instead of hyping Breezeway myself, here's Christina Thorenson of Chattanooga Vacation Rentals when I asked her what's the single technology shift that she considers most important to her business.
I think there are some folks on the property care housekeeping side that are doing some really cool stuff with confirming sanitization and disinfecting of properties, that I think where we're going to see technology with every housekeeper has a cell phone and they're checking into their system and checking out when they're done. They're taking pictures of the chemicals they're using and the spaces they've cleaned. And I think that is a technology shift. That's something that the guest might be able to access directly moving forward.
I like that. Let's give a shout out. Who are you talking about right now?
Well, I see Jeremiah Gall in Breezeway does some really cool stuff with that. they're trying to do some things where they're incorporating that tech that's already available in the smartphone to help increase the guest's level of comfort, which I think is good.
I couldn't have said that any better myself. Head over to breezeway.io/VRMB, where you can do a free demo and secure free implementation if you decide to sign on. That's roughly a $1,000 value. That's breezeway.io/VRMB. Now let's get back to the show. So how do you manage expectations? Because guests' expectations, I think, on average, are increasing to the point of being borderline out of control. As Sally in VRMB Communities puts it, are we creating an arms race of impossibly spoiled guests? How do you manage those expectations of guests and or owners? Is there anything in particular that you found to be effective?
Well, the trend that I would look at is our price points increasing at the same time. And so from my experience and our analysis, if you decrease price points, people are happier. They're not as needy. You're not building. I think a part of what that's a symptom of this issue where everyone's using, kind of pricing strategy that leans heavily into the lack of supply relative to demand. And I would say it's very similar to what this looked like 3 years ago, and then COVID kind of wiped the board on a lot of supply out there. And but 3 years ago, people were renting out a room in a house, and getting good reviews. They're literally in the house, and that's a very small percentage now of Airbnb business, I guess. But I would say that they were only charging $50 a night or something. The prices that I think people charge now very much correlate with the more needy guest kind of trend that we see. And it's, I think, up to each property manager on how to deal with that. But the way that we think about it is we have to deliver value to guests. If we don't do that, we're not going to deliver value to owners. And we got to find that optimization point in some way.
Yeah, I think that's an increasingly unglamorous side of our industry. And as we kind of shift into this third main area that I wanted to talk about, the environment can be interpreted in a number of ways. Most recently, we've been talking about eco-consciousness, vacation rental businesses that have elements of the environment preservation built into them, or businesses that have aspects that are helping to save the environment that we benefit from. Another way of looking at environment is our local community. And I know that you have strong feelings about the opportunity that vacation rental businesses have in our local communities. And you also bring this incredible background of context to that perspective. So would you mind sharing that? And then I want to touch on regulation.
Yeah, I think it's extremely important. One of the themes here is like kind of the things that we have to do to be sustainable, which, as you put it, are unglamorous. I would say it's also just really hard to figure out and adapt to. And one of those, I believe, is the place of vacation rentals, short-term rentals, in the context of a broader ecosystem of commerce that happens where these things exist. And there's a whole bunch of different activities that happen outside of people paying for accommodations. It's entertainment, it's activities in or outside the house that kind of help them create memories that I believe vacation rentals and short-term rentals are uniquely positioned to be able to funnel that bigger part of the pie. That's not just accommodations, but how much did people spend on a trip, across everybody involved, and try to funnel those dollars to local businesses. Because currently those are funneled, I think, by hotels and things like that, or historically they have. Not likely to local businesses. They don't care about local businesses. They're not big enough to work with them. I think we're uniquely positioned at this point to be able to funnel a lot of those dollars towards the people of the area in which you operate. And that's sort of a big thing about community engagement. I think if you do that, you become a part of that community that's fundamentally important, as opposed to right now, which I don't think is a big focus. And I think that's where that regulatory risk you kind of allude to comes in.
Before we get to that, how do you funnel your guests to the local economy?
For us, we have a very strong belief that you connect with good. You don't outsource guest communications somewhere to wherever, some other state or city or country. We talk to our guests and we ask them, what are you looking to do? Hey, we see that you're looking for a good Mexican food restaurant that can seat 10 people. This is where I'd recommend to go. And it takes a little bit of knowing the area, knowing location, knowing the businesses, but you can make those recommendations, and people, more often than not on our reviews are talking about the local recommendations we make and how great that was in improving their experience. So I think it's good old fashioned, you need people focused on doing it kind of thing.
And how are you presenting that information? I mean, there's one instance in which they'll call you and ask you for a Mexican restaurant recommendation, but are you packaging that information using any tools?
Yeah, we do. Messaging is a lot of it, but we also have, tablets and things like that in the house. And we move them towards the platforms on the tablets that allow us to kind of communicate updating information and stuff.
What do you use?
iPads.
Oh, but what software? Or is it just the iPad software?
Yeah, we couldn't find software that did what we tried out a couple options before. But as any business would, we could see that it was more focused on, trying to figure out how to get a margin split, on buying tickets or something to something. And, our whole thing is not to increase cost to guests. It's to give them good recommendations, and our ROI comes from great experiences and good reviews and the sustainability that comes along with that. So we do pretty fundamental stuff on iPads that has recommendations on it, some website stuff that we lead them to and things like that.
Cool. And just touching on the local economy, your team, has that become a challenging thing to find good talent and to keep them?
From a cleaner perspective, yes, because our current cleaners aren't meeting expectations or even exceeding them. It's just because with growth, that's one of those things that you continuously have to find new really good cleaners. But the way out of that is to pay for it, and I think that's really what might get missed a lot of times when I look at other kind of Facebook boards and stuff like that. Is that it's about reducing cost on that or skimming margin off of it and things like that. So we pay our cleaners extremely well, and we try to make things easy for them in every way we can, so that it's an attractive, position for them to be in. And so but it's still difficult because just the nature of that job has a lot of churn, and getting truly committed folks. And so that's a challenge. That's one of those challenges that come with growth that I think this trying to grow as quickly as you can mentality that has to run into it. And there's just no way that you can avoid the challenge of needing to train and appropriately address cleaning quality as you grow, without questioning how quickly you should grow. And then on the other side, we've been lucky. So I run the company with my brother, and my brother's really, really good. And so he, I think anyone would understand that, the company is likely to be only successful. It can't just be successful in one person. It has to be multiple people that are doing a good job of what they do. And between my brother and I, and then we have like a full-time employee named Mike, we all really, really, I think are good at what we do. And so thankfully we've avoided the back office, I think, issues that maybe can plague other companies in a new industry like this.
And do you guys have any like rules, spoken or unspoken, about staying sane?
No, unfortunately, that might be an opportunity area for us.
Because it's hard. I mean, if you're kind of a key player and you're doing this hypercritical stuff, um, and you need to take a break or you need to have a full night's sleep without picking up the ringing phone, it can lead to some stress and or burnout. That's not sustainable.
That's very true. Yeah, and so I think we may be past that phase, and COVID was a very well timed, um, kind of issue to come up. I think for us to have avoided it, because it paused us a little bit on growth and allowed us to have a more a very manageable amount of listings, for enough time to where we could figure out systems and things like that would basically mean, it's not always all hands on deck type mentality. And so if, my brother needs a few days off because he's, planning his wedding or something like that, or he's showing people around town, or he's on vacation.
Like, we'll give you a few days off if you're planning your wedding, but
as long as we know in advance, it's one of those things where we can make it work because our systems allow us to do that. We just need a little bit of time to make sure that we're ready for it. And I think we're every single one of the back office people, at least, are able to pull that off, because of how we developed our systems and whatnot to ensure that no one person can just, if they needed to leave for whatever reason, that it's not possible without horrific things happening to guests or whatever.
yeah, I think the sustainable lens, when you look at your own personal health and well-being, you must build in some pressure release valve, some ways to keep you and your team members sane. Because if you go crazy and burn out, it's not sustainable anymore.
No.
The one arguably other risk that's perhaps as, if not more dangerous than that, is the regulation discussion that we touched on. So how, taking into account everything that you're currently doing with the local economy, with your team, with doing things the right way, how does all of this fit into that looming regulatory threat in San Antonio?
Thankfully, San Antonio doesn't have the environment that seems like it's too much of a large threat here, because we've had really good, I think, leadership on the city side that's created kind of fair, regulatory ordinances that keep our, kind of density of short-term rentals to certain standards, and creates taxes where the city's benefiting and starting to create a system where we're adding value to the city. But with that said, I think there's always risk of, I'm not going to say bad actors, but bad supply is usually what I call it. But a supply of short-term rental listings that they don't care about neighbors, they don't care about paying taxes, they don't care about being good hosts, not only to their guests, but to the community and the neighbors that they have. And that concerns me, because if you get too much of that, which I think if you look at any city that has high regulatory pressure, it's likely born from that. San Antonio could very easily face stricter regulatory environment, a stricter regulatory environment if that were to happen. So it's something I'm constantly keeping an eye on for that type of thing, because right now we're, again, back in 2018, where the supply is way underpacing demand. And so it looks great to everyone to join this and do things like rental arbitrage and stuff like that, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it's bad in some circumstances. And, not pay, just jumping in without understanding kind of the things they should be doing, like paying taxes or registering their rentals. So that's something I keep an eye on just because it's my city, but it's also something I think if you look at places like somewhere that's only an hour and a half away, like Austin, where they essentially are making short-term rentals illegal, that's a good cautionary tale of what can happen just about anywhere if it gets out of control. And I think the regulatory environment risk is very very tied to how beneficial short-term rentals are to that environment, to the community.
So, hypothetically speaking, if overnight your destination had a whole new generation of vacation rental idiots who were not doing things properly, who were not taking into consideration the local community or their neighbors or anything other than looking to take advantage of this new sector that we call home, what would you do?
If those were the types that were coming into the city,
Yeah.
it's hard to say that there's any. You try to prevent it by having good supply, because the good thing about, I think, the unsustainable the thing that's the most unsustainable model or trend that I see is exactly that, where I think there's a lot of I don't know, different types of things being sold out there that say, hey, you can. It's very MLM style, multi-level marketing, kind of like sales pitches where you can retire in a year or two or whatever, and
Yeah, get rich off Airbnb.
yeah, get rich off Airbnb without ever owning a property, and stuff like that. It concerns me. But the good thing about it is it's by nature inherently an unsustainable model if you have good supply out there, which gives guests an option where clearly the owners of that property or the managers of that property care about their experience. And I think that's not something that's built in to a lot of those models. And on top of that, from the owner side, I don't think owner profitability is built into those models. And so I think they're very beatable, but you have to have good supply out there that does care about those things. And that's your best defense, I think, against it.
You have a line at the end of your bio in the community, and your bio is like a little miniature essay, very appropriately. But one of the last lines of one of the paragraphs says, "We are of the opinion that tying advocacy to meaningful contributions to the community will be our best chance to truly advocate for why people should view our community," and I'm just going to add in there, our industry, in a positive light. And I think that really beautifully sums up this business that you're building. Is there any advice that you have to anybody who's thinking about building something sustainable?
Yeah, I think so. One thing that we're looking at, trying to figure out how to get other people or other companies that are good at what they do. And I think the traditional vacation rental community, like VRMB, you have the best hosts out there. And so that's the reason why I spend my time there and not really anywhere else. But making sure that the newcomers and folks who look up to that type of community versus the get rich quick community, understanding that, look, if you give back, it's not a total loss for you. You're not, I get that a lot of people have a business mindset on these types of things. You can give back to local causes and local initiatives on things like education or sustainable housing. And if you look up on Google your community and look for these types of organizations that are, the charitable organizations that if you donate to, you get, tax credit benefit for it. So tax deductions on, it's good for you. It's good for the community. It makes you more sustainable. And even better yet, if you talk to owners and say, look, we'd love for you to donate some percentage or a nightly stay a year or something like that. And it's tax deductible for them. And so it's one of those things to where it just takes some effort and a little bit of a knowledge on how those types of things work. But, you can make an impact to your community be important to that community and therefore more sustainable, but more importantly, do some really good stuff if you really want to. And so I just want to kind of encourage people to do that.
And you guys are doing that, right? You're doing the $1 a night?
Yes. And so we do $1 a night, but we're working on something a little bit bigger, leading up to VRMB International Conference, where we can hopefully get some good money, some good fundraising happening for local San Antonio community education, which San Antonio is a city that we under-index in just about every metric on education you can imagine. So it's something that's a big focus of mine, but it would take us a long time as a single company to do a lot. But I think not only for our community here, but for any other community of folks listening, you don't need to do it on your own. Connect with other folks on Facebook groups or whatever else, and try to, band together to make a big change. And that's kind of where I'm focused at the moment.
That is a wonderful note to end on. And folks, just to correct Alex there, it's VRMA International that's taking place in San Antonio in October, not VRMB International. We are just not that awesome yet. But I will be in town hosting a private gathering along with Alex for our VRMB community members. If you'd like to join the collaborative problem solving that we're doing on a daily basis and pivot into real life interactions at events like this one, head over to vrmb.com/community. And if you'd like to reach out to Alex directly, his email is alex.cruz@welcomehomeclub.com. Until next time.